You can see this is the trail they just had come up right there.
In this Larson Adventures film, we are going to bring you to the Oatman Family Massacre site. We filmed this one-of-a-kind footage in our Revolt aircraft and also traveled to the massacred location in our Jeep to help us understand the magnitude of hardships the Oatmans endured as they struggled through the Sonoran Desert. If you're not familiar with the Oatman story, maybe you will recognize the famous photo of Olive Oatman, who had been tattooed by the Indians. There have been various movies based on her story and historical writings depicting her family's tragic massacre. The Oatman family consisted of Mary Ann and Royce Oatman and 7 children. Mary Ann was 8.5 to 9 months pregnant at the time they traveled through here. February 18th, 1851. This fateful day drove the 9-member Oatman family into history books. The horrific tragedy they experienced resulted in 6 of the family members being brutally killed by unprovoked Indian attack. 2 young girls were taken as slaves, and 1 boy was left for dead after being beaten and thrown over a cliff. For the 6 Oatman family members that perished, their journey and lives ended 28 miles west of the modern-day town known as Gila Bend in Arizona, along a ridge overlooking the south banks of the Gila River. Join us and we will take you back in time to where the Oatmans' lives were changed forever. When the Oatmans traveled through this area, there were no green farmlands. It was dry, desolate desert. The Oatmans faced many difficulties. Flying over this area, you notice that the water weeps up from the ground. This is very rare in Arizona. Crossing these areas by foot or wagon would be very difficult, and the trail would have had to divert for miles to avoid it.
I'm heading right towards it. It's 11 miles yet. Wow, this is lowland right here. It's funny how this water just comes right out.
Immediately, the desert landscape returns. I'm sure the Oatmans filled whatever containers they had with water in this area for both themselves and their oxen, not knowing when their next water would be available. The added weight would be an extreme burden, but necessary for survival. Traveling closer to water in the lowered areas along the Gila River would for the most part not be possible. The vegetation there is too thick, the sand is too deep, and the river there is by no means a direct path. The river in this area is bounded by the lava flows, and in many areas it would not be possible to get the oxen down to the river or out of the river.
9 minutes away now.
Timing when they would get water and how much water to carry would have been no easy task. Carrying too much water would be too much weight for the oxen. Carrying not enough would be deadly. They had never traveled here before and had very little knowledge of this area. At the time the Oatmans traveled here, this was still Mexico. The California gold rush had started 2 years earlier in 1849. This area was later purchased in the Gadsden Purchase and became Arizona. The Donner Party 4 years earlier had attempted to travel to California through the northern route through the Sierra Nevada mountains, resulting in many of them freezing to death. I wonder how many early settlers' decisions were influenced by the Donner Party fate, leading them to take the southern route to California through the desert. The Oatman's journey took them through the Sentinel-Arlington volcanic field. The rugged basalt landscape made traveling slow and tedious. These are the Painted Rock Mountains. The area is composed of mainly low-shield volcanoes. It almost seems wrong flying so effortlessly across this barren landscape and totally enjoying it. Every mile the Oatmans traveled through here would have been such a struggle and worn them down that much more, making the next mile even harder. Flying across this entire area in 30 minutes, I feel guilty knowing it took them so many days of hardship to travel the same distance.
Still 7.5 miles out now. Whoa, this is a big crater. See the crater? Up to our left?
I imagine the Oatmans didn't feel like they could stop to rest. Stopping to rest would cause them to be that much closer to running out of food and water.
You can see all the lava rock came out of the top of the mountain there.
The temperature changes in the desert are extreme, swinging from very hot to very cold, as much as 50 to 60 degrees in one day. The Oatmans knew they were in hostile Indian country. I wonder if they were too afraid to have a campfire during the night. Did the Oatmans try to sleep at night, wondering if they should go back? But go back to what? There was no food behind them. They had to go on, into the unknown. Each mile seemed to be getting harder. Even a small thing like a wagon wheel breaking would mean death for the family. I read where wagon wheels had to be soaked in water to keep them swollen so that they wouldn't fall apart. Do you soak your wagon wheels in water, or do you give your kids a drink?
Man, we're over terrain a lot of people don't see, you know. There are some roads out here. But boy, I wouldn't want to be taking a wagon all by myself out here. Never done it before. Man, that's brave. With all your kids, 7 kids and a pregnant wife. I mean, that's kind of asking for it in a way. I hate to say it. 7 kids and a pregnant wife. And he's out here in Indian territory. So we're 5 miles out now.
Traveling through the volcanic field by air gives a great perspective of just how large the volcanic field is. If we could go back in time, this area would be completely black from basaltic flows. During the course of time, Aeolian dust has largely covered the area and changed the color of the landscape. The winds of time tell the story of ages gone by. The basaltic flows move longer distances, some 20 kilometers from a vent. The volcanic gases escape easily, and volcanic explosions are prevented. Low-shield volcanoes are named from resemblance to how the volcano spreads out like a shield.
Yeah, I would not want to be out here in a wagon train, that's for sure. So this trail right here is also part of the wagon train trail. can see how that was made a long time ago. Wow, that's pretty wild.
This entire area we are flying over is a volcanic flow. The edge of the flows shape the Gila River.
Got a little power here. So we're 4 miles from it.
Those traveling in this area most often were having to travel miles away from the actual river flow. How hard would it be to water and feed the animals on this journey? How hard to replenish your water supplies when having to travel so far away from the water? The Gila River Basin is the low-lying green area off to our right. Before the river was dammed, the river flowed both summer and winter. Notice the edge of the canyon. It's a steep drop-off, and almost the entire distance it would not be possible to enter the canyon with a wagon.
3 miles. Man, if I hadn't marked this on my GPS, it would be a hard one to recognize. I do see where it's at, though. I see a little cave right down there off to our right. And a big trail. I wonder if that's an old Indian trail. Alright, I've got it in sight here.
We are getting a final look at the old road that ran along the top of the plateau prior to entering into the river basin. We are coming up on the Oatman Massacre site. Separating fact from fiction when studying history is not always easy. After researching this area and flying around the site, I believe this is the area they entered into the canyon. One thing I know for sure is that this is definitely the area they last traveled before climbing up out of the canyon for the final moments of their life. Some historical writings indicated the Oatmans camped down in this area in the middle of the river on a sandbar. The next day began their journey up out of the canyon. The reports do agree that the Oatmans had to unload their wagon to make it light enough for the oxen to get the wagon back out of the canyon. Look on the outer edges of the farmland and you can see what the topography may have looked like. The river bottom would have been very sandy with thick vegetation, much thicker than modern day because the river would have been flowing at the time. Still, you can see the areas where the vegetation is very thick. The Oatman Graves were originally covered with rocks on top of the plateau. The rocky ground on the top of the plateau did not allow for digging. Graves were moved at a later date to a location where they were able to actually be buried.
Where they're buried, right below us, coming up on it. So right here, dead ahead, right there is where the spot's at. And there should be a marker right there to give a little bit of power for a turn here. I see a bird off to the right, so I'm going to go ahead and swing a little wide. Expect a little bit of air movement right here because we're going over this little edge. Do you see it down there?
Made it out to the Oatman Massacre site, which is on the top of the plateau. And as you can see, February 18th, 1851, 6 of the Oatman family were killed here. There was 3 survivors. One was Lorenzo, and that was the boy. He got hit and bloodied up, and he either fell over the cliff or jumped over the cliff or was thrown over the cliff and left for dead. The Indians apparently thought he was dead. And then the 2 girls were taken. Here's the old wagon trail. This is where the wagons actually came up, and apparently you could still see some wagon tracks. Okay, I'm seeing them here where the wagons actually, but right here as you can see the old wagon tracks. They actually went in the same hole enough that you could see where the wagons went. So this is how they climbed this. 4 oxen as far as I could tell. I don't know who did that. Somebody marked that. I don't know what that is. You can definitely see where the wagons came through here. Out of the whole trip, this is what I wanted to see the most, was this little trek, to see what it was like climbing this last hill. This was the last hill that they climbed before they were killed. Very steep. Getting oxen up here, oh my gosh. You could see why Lorenzo would have had to help in loading the wagon back up. And the Oatman gravesite is right about over here. It's where the Oatmans are now buried. And if you look in the far distance, right straight through there, that's the old Butterfield stage line route.
The Mormon battalion made the southern wagon route in 1847. This is the area the Oatmans entered the riverbed. They spent the night here the night prior to being murdered. This area later became part of the Butterfield stage route, and where you see the farmland, a stage stop existed here from 1858 to 1861.
Whole different perspective when you stand here and you climb this area and you see where they were at or what they were doing. Here's the other thing that you see from the air. It's just a 2 wood sticks somebody stuck up here. That's called Oatman Mountain right there in the background. We flew over that. So I was going to see where Lorenzo had possibly run to. Went over the cliff. Can you imagine? You're running away from your family being beaten, knowing that everybody's going to die, including yourself if you didn't get away from it, and then knowing there's no way to fight and you've already been almost critically injured, and then you really don't have any options. You're probably stumbling as you go here, and then
JE 51. So let's say that he went off this cliff anywhere, landed in the rocks. He's in a panic and he had enough injuries, I guess, that the Indians thought he was dead. So that's just an incredible story of survival along with the tragic massacre story. So the story goes, after they did this, the Indians crossed the riverbed and they took her up a canyon, that at the end of the canyon there was a flat area. So the only canyon that matches that description is right over here.
We're on the north side of the river, now looking south. The Oatman girls were taken north after the massacre, up through this canyon. The Indians made them walk without their shoes so they wouldn't run away. Can you imagine being forced to walk through here barefoot?
My feet are sore already walking over these rocks. There's a lot of sharp ones. I'm wearing a pair of tennis shoes, but I already feel my feet getting bruised.
After about a year of the girls being taken as slaves by the original Indians that killed her family, they were sold to the Mojave Indians for 2 horses and a blanket. The Mojaves treated them very well and they were happy living with them. They were tattooed by this Mojave tribe as part of the Mojave tradition. While living with the Mojave Indians, Mary died from starvation due to a drought. Lorenzo never stopped looking for his sisters and eventually heard of a white woman who was living with the Indians. Lorenzo's efforts were successful, and on February 22, 1856, a Fort Yuma Comandante sent Francisco, a Yuma Indian, to get Olive Oatman from the Mojave Valley tribe. She was released and was brought back to the post. Lorenzo and Olive were finally reunited at last. Olive Oatman went on to write a book and travel the country with Lorenzo, sharing their stories and giving lectures. Olive was married in 1865 to John B. Fairchild. They relocated to Sherman, Texas, where she lived until her death in 1903. I believe it's important to recognize that a vast number of Native Americans saved the lives of countless early settlers. There's a lot of information on the internet and in the books that were written about the lives of these incredible people. I highly encourage you to dig deeper into the stories.